talking about the chapter 3, the chapter on motivation and teaching reading. And it's important to just get this idea out there explicitly, the idea that motivation and engagement and identity and attitude and interest, these are all things that can actually be taught and learned. You may even actually have to give lessons on some of these things to guided reading groups or to entire classes, but definitely to individual kids because they're not in tune with the affective area. In school, we get tuned in pretty clearly to the cognitive areas of our brain, the ways of thinking, the facts that we learn, those types of things that are out there in the cerebral cortex. But there's a whole area of your brain, a couple of areas of your brain that are really dedicated to this affective area that has much more to do with your attitudes, interests, identity, your beliefs, your feelings, and so on. That starts deep down in the amygdala, which is one of the oldest areas of the brain that we share in common with all of the lower animals as well as the higher animals. And it's that area of the brain that deals with risk and safety. When we feel like we're with our people, that we're in the right place at the right time, all of those things kind of come together for us, and we don't have any alarms go off in that amygdala area. When we feel like we're out of our depth, that we're doing something that is not succeeding, that we're not with people that we should be with, and so on, that the activity that we're doing doesn't make sense to us based on our past experience. All of those things turn on areas of the brain that raise warning bells for us, and we want to seek safety. And it gets that fight or flight thing going inside of our brain. And that area of your brain, the affective area, is connected pretty tightly to the hippocampus, which is the area that stores all of your emotional memories. So things like bad experiences, bad dreams, good experiences, fun times, all of those kinds of things, those all live in a specific area of your brain as well. And the interesting thing about the amygdala and the hippocampus is that they have laminar connections, wires that go up to the cognitive area, which means that they can control things up there. So when we feel challenged or unsafe, you have that feeling or that experience of freezing where you can't think anymore, where you can't decide what to do. For me, I always remember the moment when I was about 10 years old and was in a piano recital and couldn't remember the part that I was at, and the more embarrassed I got, the less I could remember. And if you've ever experienced that feeling of freezing in front of a group of people, you know that area of your brain that is the alarm bells, it goes off and it stops everything in your cognitive area from functioning the right way. So what we're looking at right here on this screen is an interest inventory, and this is something we've been using for several years at a community literacy program in Fort Collins, just to get kids started at telling us what kind of books would you like to be seeing. This started out as a paper pencil survey that we had seen published, where all of these tags, picture books, classics, history, and so on, all of these categories were there on a written survey that kids were supposed to check off, which one they would like to see more of. But what we found was that with kids between the ages of about 5 and 9 years old, they don't know what a lot of these words mean. They're not so strong in literature that they know the difference between poetry and fantasy. So some of those genre terms and academic terms like history, literary terms like folk tales, they don't know what those mean particularly until they actually get a lot of experience with books. So seeing a biography with a picture of a famous person on the front, seeing animals books with those pictures of animals, seeing fantasy with the dragons and the magic lights and so on, seeing poetry and seeing that familiar Shel Silverstein picture there. All of these books should be the kinds of books that kids have seen around And if they're not, what you need to do is you need to actually do something like a book walk, where you gather 4 or 5 books of each of these different kinds and you lay them out on tables, desks, or around on the floor and give kids a good browsing experience. When we do this at the neighborhood, we often have between 150 and 200 books on the floor of the HOA clubhouse, and we let the kids walk around and put sticky notes on each one of the kinds of books that they would like to see more of. Teachers I know who do this, they can do that book walk maybe once or twice a year where they get the kids that chance to browse. But then after that, they just open up a suggestions box where the kids have these standard slips that they put in where they say, this is the kind of book I'd like to be seeing next. And teachers who I've worked with who take that seriously go to the library once a week to try to gather more of the kinds of books their kids want to be seeing. And kids will often surprise you. I still have good memories of experiences with teachers whose kids were asking them for more coffee table books. And this was a first grade class. They wanted to see a lot of these coffee table books that weren't necessarily written for kids, but had really big pictures and easy to read captions underneath those pictures. And it became a good first grade tradition for that classroom. So, as you noticed in reading Chapter 3 in Best Practices in Literacy Instruction, there's some really strong researchers in the area of motivation in reading. John Guthrie is one of the top people that's out there, and Alan Wigfield, and you see that they publish regularly. And this article was published not too long ago in Scientific Studies of Reading, just a little over 10 years ago. I'm sorry, that article was originally from 99. They put it in online in 2009. But still, Guthrie and Wigfield have been publishing in this area of motivational research for a long time. Linda Gambrell is another key researcher who has done foundational research on motivation, and she actually wrote an assessment instrument that has been research validated called the Motivational Reading Profile. So resurgence in interest of motivation in the mid-1990s. It's also something that has been kind of pushed to the side because you'll hear academics often talk about these 5 pillars, the scientific approach to reading, having only information on phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, but there is a deep and wide area of research on motivation. The other thing that we need to understand is that much of the research on motivation is in educational psychology in general, which means that the studies don't have to be done on reading for us to understand how motivation works. So the Handbook of Competence and Motivation is a whole handbook of research studies and compilations of research that tell us the things that we need to know about motivation. Among the key things that we need to know is the relationship between successes and ongoing motivation. So what does it take for people to keep going? What does it take for people to decide they're going to quit, and so on? Also, the self-determination theory is something that we read about in competence motivation, which is the idea that children, like all other people, need to feel autonomy. They need to feel relatedness, and they need to feel competence at the same time. And in schools, too often we focus on competence at the expense of autonomy and relatedness. And those are all things that can be taught or put into a curriculum. So I just put those terms in: autonomy, relatedness, and competence. That brings us up several of these YouTube videos that will take you through some of the research on self-determination theory, if you'd want to go there. So autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And I'm going to probably go ahead and stop there, because I think the point for me is that this is an area of research that we need to pay attention to as reading teachers, and it actually does boil down to concrete assessments. Last couple of things I'll say, and we'll reach back into these things when we get into the ELITS 671 class, is that you can do assessment and instruction on interest, and this is an actual instrument that we use. You can do assessment on attitude and identity through using something like the motivational reading profile, so surveys and so on. And you can also do student interviews that give you the information that you need on identity. I'll go ahead and stop there. Excited to be talking about motivation and to have you doing some readings in that area this week.